Hello everyone and welcome to a new video. Today we're going to be brutally pinning two sewing patterns against each other. Across my sewing journey, I've struggled between just buying a pattern and drafting my own. Depending on the project and my brain capacity, I will pick either, both, sometimes mismatch them together. And so I've been spending some time browsing online for commercial patterns, and I've always been particularly curious about those commercial patterns that brand themselves as historical. I don't mean the small companies that do historical research and the likes, I mean the big four companies like McCall's, Butterick, Simplicity, which have historically inspired patterns. Often these patterns are a collaboration with people who have experience in historical costuming, and I wondered what changes in the commercialization of the pattern. So today we're going to be making an Edwardian skirt using Butterick's Edwardian pattern 5957, which I've just lost. It goes right here. 5957. But wait, we're also going to be making another Edwardian skirt using the Voice of Fashion. The Voice of Fashion is a book which compiles patterns from original Edwardian magazines and uses the diamond cutting system, which was a patented drafting system that utilized custom rulers based on bust or waist size to draft patterns. We're also going to follow Butterick's instructions for the Butterick skirt and Edwardian instructions from Authentic Victorian Techniques, which ironically is an edited version of 1905 book Dressmaking Up to Date, published by none other than the Butterick Publishing Company. It all comes full circle. So now that we have a premise and patterns, let's talk about materials. I impulse bought a lot of this lightweight wool and cotton blend suiting, which I thought would make lovely skirts, and it was deeply discounted. I'll be using it for both skirts. These skirts will be normal daytime skirts rather than part of an evening ensemble, and at the end I'll also be customizing them more for my history-bound wardrobe. So they will be historically adjacent. But I'll make sure to show you first what they look like without the customization. My first step will be to have a look at those instructions, because I find that pattern instructions, be them modern or Edwardian, are often hard to understand. So, after cutting out my pattern, I ironed it out so it was easier to handle and cut out my pieces. I did not do a mock-up because I don't do mock-ups for unfitted skirts. Too much fabric, too much hassle. I picked out a pattern from the book that reminded me of the illustration skirt on the pattern Placket. And got to drafting. I picked out the ruler that matched my waist measurement, uncorseted by the way, I will explain later, and photocopied it. I cut it out and glued it to cardboard to make an extra long ruler for easier drafting. Then I just followed the diagrams. This is time consuming, but pretty straightforward. So something that I really wanted to do with this project was to show you the differences between the two patterns laid down so you could very clearly see them. And so I've got two pieces here. This is my own draft from the Voice of Fashion, and that is the Butterick pattern. And I was going to lay out the whole of the patterns on the floor and then show you a very clear comparison. However, I can't do that because of this. Because the Voice of Fashion is whack. That's insane. I mean, look at the size of this. So that's the back of the skirt, the back panel, and this is the side back. I drafted everything according to the book, and it's just insane. Like, it's way too long. So the Butterick pattern was already going to be too long for me, but that's even longer, even allowing for a more traditional Edwardian train or whatever. Crazy. And then as you can clearly see, the side back seam is longer than that. So what I think has happened is that they don't, I don't know, I don't know the way that works, but I think maybe they didn't work out this pattern properly. And yeah, I've double checked all my measurements. I did it correctly. It's something wrong with the way it proportions up, I think. So here we are. That's like 1 meter wide just at the back. So we're going to see what my fabric allows me to do. But this is the whole floor of my sewing room, just with 2 pieces. So let's look at the front and the side front. Okay, so this was more what I was thinking it would be like. So here we have the center front panel, which is cut on the fold for both of them. And this is the side front. This really surprised me. The Voice of Fashion pattern for the side front is super wide. I'm going to double check the illustration to see if there's like some decorative pleating or gathering there or whatever. But that really surprised me. But I wanted to show you what they actually look like. Because of those unforeseen problems with the Voice of Fashion pattern, I decided to tackle the Butterick skirt first. I was also packing up to leave Glasgow, so everything was a bit of a mess. So, the instructions for this pattern tell you to cut out the pattern pieces out of your fabric, then out of an underlining for which it recommends cotton or cotton blends, and then a portion of the hem about 6 inches deep out of an interlining for which it recommends flannel. I scoured my stash and managed to find a black polycotton, which I'll be using as the underlining, and 1 scanty meter of white flannel, which will be my interlining. The way they have you do this is a bit weird. They tell you to cut the flannel into certain sized rectangles and then trace out the skirt hem, square up 6 inches and cut it out. I had so little fabric that I traced the hem as I could and pieced the flannel to the other bits. The flannel is pinned to the bottom hem of the underlining, basted into place and then top edge stitched down to the underlining. Then the top edge is stitched down to the underlining. The underlining is basted to the outer fabric so that the pieces are together and will be treated as one, with the flannel sandwiched in between them. This is typically called flatlining and very common throughout the 19th century. The seams are matched, pinned and stitched. At this point, they recommend that you overcast raw edges of the seam allowance or machine zigzag. Since this was a modern make anyway, a modern take on a historical pattern, I brought out my overlocker and just zoomed right through them. Their placket instructions are a little different. You only add a placket to one side and then use the turned under seam allowance on the other. I finished this off by hand because this is who I am. And then I pleated up the back so I could show you what it looks like. Hi! So the skirt is nearly done. I should have just included some footage of it worn. It is at the point where all it needs is hem and closures, and I thought I would show you what the pattern looks like, mostly unaltered, at that point. However, as hopefully you've been able to tell from the footage, this is not the kind of skirt that I would wear very often. This is a proper Edwardian skirt, and like the pattern shows you, it's not meant to be like a middle to working class woman's going to work skirt. This is meant to be a promenade, day dress kind of vibe. And that's not me, is it? There's a lot of yardage in this skirt and I really like the fabric and I do actually really like the cut of it. So my goal now is to pivot from this testing out the pattern to what it looks like unaltered and making it wearable for me. So I think the first problem that you might have been able to tell is that the skirt is too long. Now, I have made a couple of full-length proper Edwardian hemline kind of skirts. I don't wear them very often, and I'm always afraid of them getting dirty by dragging on the floor. I'm always worried about tripping over them and stuff like that. So I've decided to make it shorter. I'm going to be looking at what I want it to be is probably here. Maybe just above ankle. Oh, you can't see. Here. One more. Here. Just above ankle, calf length. So I estimate that's about a 10-inch difference, 10 to 12, maybe more actually, inch difference at the hem. Now, if you remember from earlier in the video, the way this pattern does hem stiffening is by adding a layer of flannel that you baste directly to the hem skirt. That means that if I were to just chop off the extra length, I would lose the hem stiffening and all that I've already done. So instead, my goal is going to be to add 3 quite deep pin tucks. And this hopefully means that the skirt will also be versatile, not pin tucks, just tucks, because they're going to be quite wide, probably about 1.5 inches wide. And then turn the hem, whatever I have left over, in. So I think my next few steps are, oh, and then obviously the train. I don't know if you could see in the footage, this train is huge, humongous, and although that's nice, it's not practical. However, because of that difference in length, I won't be able to take up enough excess in the tucks for that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to measure the front, even it out at the sides and back to make sure it's all the same length. Then I'm going to cut that off and unpin the flannel, salvage it, and cut off so it's even. Then I'm going to re-add the flannel by just basting it on. And then I'm going to mark and baste the tucks, see if it works. And then I think I would like to just finish the hem with a little bit of a binding, which is actually what the pattern suggests you do. I will try to find, I'd like to find some sort of wool braid or something with a bit more texture just to bind that edge. Maybe some Petersham ribbon, I don't know. We'll figure it out. But I thought it'd be really important to distinguish between taking a big full pattern like this and making it wearable for you. You don't have to follow the pattern exactly as it is. The other alteration I've made to make the pattern more useful to me is I added a pocket, which is obviously not in the instructions, God knows why. And then the other thing is that they actually tell you to finish the closure in a very historically accurate way, which is just to add some hooks and hand-sewn eyes, which I really liked. However, this is meant to be my more modern version without the historical bits. So instead what I'm going to do is I'm going to add some snaps to the closure and probably a couple of buttons to the top. I prefer buttons because I find they're really secure, and I can add 1 button in 2 different bits so I can wear this skirt tighter or looser depending on what I want. And that's about it. So I did exactly that. The tucks were very, very messy to accomplish because of the gored nature of the skirt. There's actually some advice for that in authentic Victorian dressmaking techniques, which naturally I only found after. They were so messy and horrid that I didn't film it. I finished the hem with a piece of wool tape, just folded in half and top stitched into place, and pretended the tucks didn't bother me. I was also rushing to finish the skirt so I could take some photos before leaving Scotland. But here's a quick preview of it. Now, let's move on to the Edwardian skirt. I actually ended up drafting a different pattern because I didn't trust that first one at all. I remembered I actually had drafted a skirt from this book before, and I decided to find that tried and tested pattern instead. I redrafted that pattern onto paper. Immediately it looked better, so I went ahead and cut out the skirt panels. The construction is similar in the sense that you start by sewing up the side seams. However, since I'm following authentic Victorian dressmaking techniques, I thought I'd mention that guidance here.
Firstly, the book proudly declares the death of the interline skirt and instead defends a drop lining, which it sometimes calls the foundation skirt or petticoat. I've done this one before on a different video and I'll link it down below. As I already had several petticoats that would work well for this style of skirt, I skipped on making one of the same pattern as the skirt. Therefore, we can get straight to sewing the side seams. A pocket was added because of necessity, though not mentioned in the pattern book or the sewing book, but I gotta have pockets, man. Then a placket. I have an in-depth video about how to add this kind of placket to a skirt, so I'll link it down below. I will say it's no longer my preferred method, as even though I was super careful, I still broke a record 3 needles while sewing over these eyes.
We take a brief intermission from the previous video format just because I really wanted to show you. It really doesn't matter how long you've been sewing or how long you've been doing whatever. I put in my pocket, I remember to book and put in my pocket. I have done this kind of skirt and these kinds of pockets probably dozens of times by now. And one of my videos on here was the first video where I did it and I forgot to put the pocket in. It's a saga, okay? But look, I have done it yet again. I have put the pocket in between the front and the side panel instead of between the side and the side back panel. And you know what? I'm devastated because this was a beautiful pocket application that will not be repeated. Look how beautiful! And now we unpick. Now we cry and we unpick.
After fixing the pocket, I measured and evened out my hem and started prepping it. The Butterick book has several different recommendations for finishing hems, so I had to pick one, and I picked the one that sounded the most similar to what was done on the modern pattern, so that we could better compare them. This was under the section of finishing walking skirts and was described as a simple hem finish, where a bias strip of cambric or flannel could be added to the bottom of the skirt, and the hem allowance folded over it. This was what I did. I was out of flannel from the other skirt, but I used a similar weight of brown wool blend scraps. I folded the hem over the strip and basted across the bottom and top. The book then says a piece of seam binding or a bone casing should be basted flat over the raw edge. I used a piece of lace seam binding I had on hand. I then top stitched this into place and used those stitching lines as guidance for my first row of velvet ribbon. I wanted to add 3 black velvet stripes of ribbon to the bottom of the skirt, as I'd seen this on a couple of photographs and really liked it. A lot of my previous skirts were plain and I wanted to add a little more interest to these with the tucks and the ribbons. Then I added 2 more rows. I slapped on a waistband and closed up the back seam and the skirt was done. So let's have a look. Okay, so here is skirt number 1. This is the Butterick pattern. I think it's lovely. So it's quite flared. There's a lot of fabric in it. I have cut it to be not very long. Basically, I wanted to be able to wear this on my day-to-day, as I mentioned previously, and obviously the tucks took up a lot of the extra fabric. I think it's really cute. It has a good pocket. It fits well, I would say, and the only thing that surprised me is how freaking heavy it is. I noticed pretty much as soon as I put it on to go out and take those photos, but there's a lot of fabric in this skirt. I think there's more fabric in this skirt than the Edwardian, even without me having, obviously this one has more fabric to start with because instead of cutting off the hem, I took it up in tucks. But even without that, I think this one has more. I'll measure the hems when I try on the Edwardian one and let you know. But yeah, it's cute. It's very comfortable and I think it'll be really versatile, very cute, and I have no other things to complain about it. I did actually, I mentioned that it was heavy. I did actually weigh, I weighed it on my kitchen scales. I weighed both skirts and there's a ½ kilo difference between this one and that one, which obviously accounts for the extra fabric, the polycotton that I used to interline it, all of that. But yeah, I think it's lovely. It's a good skirt. So I would recommend this pattern. I would maybe not do the whole hassle that they did because it does make it quite heavy. So I think I'd be interested in reusing this pattern and do it with more Edwardian construction methods for a more lightweight skirt and possibly even a summer skirt. Although it is now August and we're at the end of the summer, but you know. And yeah, I'll go and try the Edwardian one on so you can see both of them. Okay, so here is skirt number 2. So this is the pattern from Voice of Fashion. And this, I believe, was dated 1902. Is this right? 1902, 1905? 1900s, maybe? Oh my god, please cat correct it on the screen because I've forgotten. Yeah, so I think there's a stark difference between these skirts. You can see it just straight on. And I think it might be from the interlining because it's the exact same fabric, exact same petticoat. And we'll compare, I'll show you the patterns laid out so you can compare them now. So this is the only way I could find an angle to show you the patterns laid out. This is my dining room floor. Please excuse the mess and the stray sock over there. So on the bottom we have the paper tissue from Butterick. On top we have the 1900 pattern of fashion pattern. As you can see, the difference is very minimal. This one, the Butterick, is slimmer at the top, I think consistently throughout all panels. And then, as you can see, the flare is more evenly distributed across all panels, while the flare of the Voice of Fashion does tend towards the back. Please ignore the difference in length, it's just because I drafted this one to be shorter, but I did not compromise on the flare when I did it. So the way they do it is they give you the final measurement for the hem, and I just moved that up to where I knew my final hem would be. So all in all, very similar patterns. I'm very impressed. Of course, as noted, this one leans more towards the back, but I think what this can show you is that the patterns are similar, but the difference in construction really does make a difference between the flare of the skirt, as I think the interlining and the hem treatment will show. But yeah, this is really interesting to see it like this, and I hope you find it interesting too. But I think there's also more consistent flaring throughout each panel of the Butterick, and this, most of the volume is at the back. I actually need to fix the back a little bit because the skirt is a little loose, so it hangs back, it hangs down. But I still like this. I think it's a very nice skirt. It's sleek. I like the ribbons. It is not as swooshy as the other one, which I find really interesting because I've just measured the hems, and this hem is just over 4 meters, and the Butterick hem is 3.8. So there's actually less volume to the hem of that one, but it looks so much more flared out, and I think that is from the extra stability from the interlining and also the hem treatment, possibly because there was such a much deeper hem on that one. I'm pretty happy with both, you know. The construction was, once you wrapped your hand around what they wanted you to do with the interlining and lining on that, they both produce really clean finishes. They're straightforward to follow, and they produce very different results, which I think is really interesting. I think I'll want to go look at some more Edwardian photographs before I really make up my mind. I feel like this one is obviously the more historical because it's literally from the time period, and that one may be a little bit more adapted to our modern sensibilities or aestheticisms, because I do personally, for my aesthetic and my body, prefer that one. I think it's more flattering. Obviously these aren't worn without a corset, or are worn without a corset, and I just wanted to mention that's because on my day-to-day I generally don't wear a corset, and so I wanted skirts that would still look fit and work well without a corset. Something that I do sometimes do, which I think you can do as well, I'll show you real quick, is that I add a second button. If I'm closing with a button, or if you're using a hook and an eye, you can just add a second eye, so that when you are corseted, you can just change that closure. This will mess with the pleats here a little bit in the placket, but I find that usually, because if the pleats are deep enough, it's not a significant change. But this means that you get 2 adaptable skirts for different situations, which is what I wanted anyway. If you stuck along this far into the video, thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed this little Butterick and Edwardian sewing experiment. I think both skirts are really lovely, and I am glad of this project. If you'd like to see more, check out the links in the description box for other skirts, other Edwardian adventures, and I will see you all next week.